Hey, what's going on, everyone? Whoops, how did that happen? I must have hotkeyed something on accident. Hope you had a great weekend. This is Mike from Go Cell Phone Repair here to talk about some technology stuff. We keep this at roughly an hour and 6 topics over here on my left. We're going to spend about 10 minutes on each one. Give or take, they are listed chronologically in the video description. So if you want to get the information sources that I'm using here, you can click through and see the same articles that we're going to be looking at today. And then, of course, if we have any questions come through the chat from people who need assistance, we'll try to address those if possible. Good to see you guys. Carl, yes, I agree. It's all about the attitude. There's lots of truth to that. So today we're going to be talking about the inner workings of Vivo Nex's, not Nexus, but the Vivo Nex plural form, which is difficult to say and make it clear. So the Vivo Nex's pop-up selfie camera. Samsung possibly planning to release 3 different Galaxy S10 models. Yeah, I know it's crazy. We're already talking about the Galaxy S10, and aren't we still waiting for the Galaxy Note 9 at this point? Motorola patents a foldable smartphone design, and a discussion of why that is becoming a problem as far as the inherent issues with an OLED screen that will fold at all, really. Apple refutes iPhone passcode bypass claims. So if you didn't already hear, somebody said that they could hack into the iPhone, and Apple is saying no, that's not entirely true. So hopefully we'll find out one way or another on that one. AT&T buying a company that delivers targeted ads based on your web browsing. Sounds fun, right? So they keep track of everywhere you go on the internet, and then they use that information to decide what kind of advertising to send to you. So I don't know, could be a good thing, I guess, if you're shopping. In other cases, not really, and maybe an area for concern. And smart home devices being used in domestic abuse. That's a weird one. Never would have thought of that, but as technology progresses, there are all sorts of different ways that people can apply it, and they can, of course, be used for good or evil. We'll talk about this and more right after the break, which isn't going to move because I didn't set it up properly. God, this is annoying. I think I finally got all the other animations working properly, though. So, Jerry Worley, welcome. Hey, glad to see you. So, first time here, cool. We're going to run through some topics, and we do this every Monday at 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and then on Thursdays at 6 p.m. Sometimes it's just me, sometimes we have a guest that we interview, so that remains to be seen, because usually I get the confirmations kind of last minute. That's the way things work here. So I want to start off with this, which I didn't actually list in the topics for discussion because I think it's kind of been talked out and everyone knows about it, but there is a serious problem with some MacBook Pro, and I want to say MacBook Air keyboards. It might just be the Pro, but Apple has come out, and we're kind of seeing more of this lately. You know, they're coming forward and saying, yes, there is a problem with the device, and we are going to offer a solution for customers. So sometimes that means that the device will be replaced, sometimes it will be repaired. It's usually going to be the former, because when it comes to anything beyond a screen or a battery, Apple doesn't do a whole lot of repairs inside of their retail locations. They tend to ship that stuff off, and of course no one wants to wait for their phone to be sent out and then shipped back, with rare exceptions. So as far as I can tell, though, for this one, it sounds like they're doing the repairs in store. Sometimes it will involve replacing a key, sometimes the entire keyboard. It all depends. So you see here in the article, it says Apple has admitted that its MacBook and MacBook Pro laptop, okay, so its MacBook and MacBook Pro laptop keyboards made since 2015 are susceptible to becoming stuck or breaking, and is promising to repair them for free. So if you have one of those devices and you're running into any kind of issues as far as the keyboard, I would encourage you to take your computer to Apple and have them fix it, you know, if that's an option. Not everyone lives within close range of an Apple store, but if you do, and they're saying, yes, we will take care of this problem for you, I always encourage people to do that. You know, it's in our best interest to send the customer, or to give the customer their best option. Of course, if Apple is then unable to help you, hopefully we can do something for you. And that isn't always the case. You know, when it comes to phones, going to the Apple Store is not always your best option. It really depends on the circumstances, and some people just don't like the idea of making an appointment, waiting in line, and ultimately oftentimes ending up with a completely different device. You know, if you want your phone repaired, that's one thing, but when it gets swapped out for a refurbished item that is presented as, what is the term they're using? They don't call it refurbished, but they don't call it new, but they call it something else, like, I don't know, recertified or reassembled or something like that. But you're typically inheriting a device that came from someone else who had problems with it. They already took it to the store. They sent it out to wherever, to one of their depots, and had it repaired, and then decided that it was passable, and then they offer that as a replacement unit. And that's not always the best option. I think in most cases, a lot of us would prefer to have a device with a known history. So if I break something on my phone, I know exactly what I broke and what it's been through up till now. So I'm happy to get that part replaced or repaired, but I don't really want it swapped out for some other device that I don't have any involvement with up till this point, and then given like a 60-day warranty or something like that. But for this one, I'd say if you've got a MacBook or MacBook Pro that's got keyboard issues, definitely take it to Apple, because if they're going to take care of it, it's hard to imagine too many things going wrong with that. You know, of course, you are going to be in that environment where you'll be presented with other things that you might want to purchase, but that is all part of the deal, of course. Anyways, enough about that. Let's see. I did want to talk. Okay, so the reason, though, that I thought this was interesting is because we know now that Apple has admitted to the touch disease problem. We know as of just a couple of days ago, they're admitting to a problem with the butterfly keyboard design that they have on these MacBooks. And it leaves us to question, I think, will Apple eventually acknowledge the problem with what they're calling loop disease now on the iPhone 7 and 7 Plus models, where you end up losing sound functionality, voice memos, problems with the speaker and so forth because of a design flaw that those of us within the community, repair community, already know about. But it takes a certain amount of pressure and probably seeing a large number of something happening repeatedly before a big company steps forward and says, yes, we'll acknowledge there was a problem with the design, a problem with the manufacturing process, and we're going to take care of that. As you know, they were sued in Australia recently and ordered to pay a settlement to class action suit where they had told customers that they couldn't be helped after they had their home button replaced on their iPhones, and it resulted in an error 53. Just kind of said, sorry, you had someone else work on your phone. Now we can't help you anymore. Well, that was a bad decision on that part. So hopefully, and we had this discussion last week also, $6.6 million sounds like a slap on the hand to Apple, but I think the bigger picture is that it's getting a message across that says, if you don't do the right thing for your customers within this particular market, you're going to have to pay monetary compensation. So with that kind of setting a standard of expectation, Apple would be wise to, in my opinion, acknowledge these kind of defects, as would any other company. We know when you make something that doesn't work the way that it's supposed to, and there's a problem with that on a large scale, it's really your responsibility to offer that customer a practical solution, not something kind of over the top and silly like, give us $300 and we'll give you a refurbished model. So who knows? But I think this is an indication, hopefully, that they're going to be more conscious of their public image and be held, be responsible for these kind of defects. Another meaning for butterfly effect. That's a good call, Johnny. Usually refurbished imply that it's secondhand already. Almost entirely, I would say almost across the board, when you get a refurbished phone, yeah, it's secondhand, and that's what concerns me. I certainly don't want to take my car in, and I know I always use the automobile example. It really could be anything. Let's say you have a dishwasher, a refrigerator, any kind of appliance, any type of technology that you've got. If there's a problem with it, you don't necessarily want to swap it out for one that's been repaired that belonged to someone else at some point, right? So it's preferable usually to have it fixed, and I think that's where we found our position within the market here, is to be able to offer a customer a repair for their device instead of just replacing the whole thing with something that's already had problems and we don't know what the history behind that was. Are we talking about zombie phones? What? Did I miss something? I'm not sure about the zombie phone parts. If we are blaming the defects on design oversight, then the states are losing face. If they put the blame on the OEM, then they have to step up on the quality control on Foxconn. Yeah, that's a good point. And ultimately, that's where a lot of this stuff comes from. But I would wonder if, especially when we talk about the loop disease, touch disease, that kind of stuff, I think it's still open to debate as far as whether or not that is a design flaw or a manufacturing defect. You know, it really could be either one. I know that one opinion is that because the phone is, you know, the board is having pressure on it, it's being bent, it's pulling those pads off of the PCB. But there's also a good argument that says that, you know, maybe it's just the way that they're put together. Maybe those pads that run along the edge of the integrated circuit aren't sufficiently attached to the motherboard, and that's why they're pulling away. I mean, really kind of still guessing on that one. Not 100%, but let's move on to this. I think this is really cool, if for no other reason because it's so different. Like, it's so out of the blue. We've seen a lot of companies just kind of doing the same thing and doing more of the same thing, and then everyone kind of sees, you know, typically Apple does something and everyone does the same thing that Apple does, and a lot of it is helpful, and you know, quite a bit of what's happening doesn't really necessarily seem to be in the consumer's best interest. And I'll give you an example. You know, when we remove a headphone jack from a phone, it's easy enough to say that it's great to be able to have wireless headphones, but it's hard to say, hey, it's great that you can't use your 3.5mm headset jack anymore. That's a good thing. Good thing you can't use your headphones that you already have with this new phone that you bought. I can't think of a good argument for that. And you know, when we talk about something like 3D Touch, for example, I believe that that's probably one of the least used features on an iPhone that was kind of built up to be a big thing. And I, to this day, I don't know a single person. I know plenty of people who use iPhones. 3D Touch doesn't even seem to be, you know, like you forget it's there, to the best of my knowledge. So when we come up with something different, and right now the focus being on having as much screen real estate as possible, right? We want to have as much of this device showing an image as we possibly can, and no big borders at the top and bottom, no chins, no what do you call it? No notches at the top. You know, we just want screen end to end all over the place. And of course, one of the big issues with that is having a front-facing camera and having facial ID software, not to mention an opening for the speaker on the front of the phone. Well, obviously, technology is moving towards a direction of making this a real thing. And as we know, there are two phones out there right now that we're looking at that seem to show some promise. And one of them is the Nex from Vivo, which, to my surprise, I want to mention this, everyone, because I like to give credit where it's due. So I did not realize this, but there is a website called MyFixGuide. I'm going to open it up here so you can see it. This is myfixguide.com. I don't know how. I've never seen this before. So we know we have iFixit, we have YouTube, we have all these great resources when it comes to disassembling phones and repairing them. For whatever reasons, I've never heard of this before. So MyFixGuide, and I haven't had time to go through the entire website and take a close look at it, but what's cool is they do show a teardown. So they've already got their hands on this phone apparently, and you can get a good look. If you want to go there, I put a link down in the video description. You can get a good look at the inside of this phone, and they show the mechanism where this little pop-up camera is housed. Darn it, I clicked the wrong thing there. I'm trying to scroll here and it's not really cooperating in such a small window. So the big concern about these retractable cameras, of course, is that if you have moving parts on any sort of electronic device, you know, that is a part that's susceptible to wear and tear and breakage, you know, especially if you can imagine a little camera sticking out of the top of your phone, and then you happen to drop the phone at that time and it lands on that camera. Even if it doesn't snap all the way off, chances are it's going to become misaligned and you're going to end up with some problems there. And this is one of the things that way back in the day we used to see on phones that had external antennas. You know, one of the things that broke on antennas most often was that little rubber antenna that was sticking out of the top, and even the retractable ones, you know, they just got chewed up and bent and everything. So this is one of the things that people raise as a potential issue for this, is having a camera that, you know, is moving up and down every single time you want to open the application. And, you know, only time will tell. Obviously, you would assume that this company has taken steps to kind of test this thing durability-wise and make sure it's going to last. We used to have Motorola who would brag about how on their DPC 550, which was one of the early flip phone models, if you haven't been around to see that one, you have to look it up. But one of the things that they claimed is that they would run that thing through a test where they open and close the little flip on the lower end of the phone 1 million times to test it, to make sure that it wasn't going to be a problem. and that was their quality control, or that was their standard for manufacturing. You know, this thing needs to be able to open and close 1,000,000 times without wearing out. So the fact that they're able to do that back in the early 90s would make me think that by now it certainly should be possible to design something that will retract, you know, pop out and then retract, you know, quite a few times, hopefully throughout the lifetime of the phone, and still function properly. Now, obviously, if you get some dirt or dust or any other debris down inside there, that could cause some problems. But again, we'll have to see. And this is a completely different design than the other phone. And let's see, it says there is a spring in there, but it's actually the silver spiral stepper to the right that pushes the camera up. So unfortunately, my mouse doesn't show in here unless I turn it on. But if you can see, there's a little piece on the right-hand side of that spring in there that apparently is what brings the camera up and down. The teardown also shows the vibration motor that is part of the Nex's piezo, or is it piezoelectric? I'm not sure. Speaker system, which replaces the standard earpiece you get on other phones. So this is already here. We can design a phone that doesn't have a cutout for the earpiece, which, you know, if you've seen the inside of these phones, probably a great idea. That's one of the places where dust and dirt and grime and, you know, makeup and all sorts of other stuff tend to accumulate right inside that little cutout for the speaker. So if we can do away with that, that would certainly lead us to expect the phone to last a little longer in that area. It follows the same principle as Xiaomi's original Mi Mix, but my fixed guide says the approach is quite different. When so many companies are producing smartphones that are hard to tell apart, it's neat to get a close look at some of the standouts. And so again, if you visit this site, you can get a really good look at this phone from the inside and have an idea what to expect. And I would assume if you have to perform a repair, they have the first teardown that I'm aware of. So we'll have to see how this goes. You know, the other thing, of course, is putting the fingerprint scanner under the display so that you don't have to have any sort of button on the front of the phone or on the back of the phone for that matter. And again, I stick with my original idea, and that is putting the fingerprint scanner on an area of the phone that you're already touching. You know, if you look at this phone, if you look at this photo, most of us hold our phones something like this. So wouldn't it make sense to put the fingerprint scanner under the left or right hand side where your thumb or your index finger are, so you just pick up the phone and it unlocks. You don't have to worry about hunting around on the screen or, you know, reaching some unnatural home button that's positioned right below a camera, and you end up putting your finger on the camera instead of the fingerprint scanner. Just my idea. I think that would work. So be excited to see this thing in action. On the flip side, if we take into account that the older and more miles accumulated, the more reliable as the phone with space shuttles, then it's not so bad to have something that served for long. Yeah, maybe so, Johnny. And at the same time, when we talk about refurbished phones, we're talking about something that did have some sort of problem. So the reason that it's refurbished is because it didn't last that many miles. You know, something went wrong with it, and they took it in, they fixed whatever that thing was. And as you can imagine, when we perform repairs, you know, every time you take a phone apart and put it back together, if you do it properly, you don't expect that to cause any problems. But if you see some of the craftsmanship that goes into a lot of these devices, it would make you think that probably the fewer times that person at the repair depot has to open that thing up and close it, the better for the person who's using the phone. And I wanted to show you guys something because I was working on this this little device, which I think I moved, for repairing home buttons, for replacing the Turtle IC on the iPhone 7 series. And I bought some aftermarket home buttons, and the soldering on those things is pretty scary. So obviously they won't do anything. They're purely for cosmetics, but they attach these things with, I don't know what. I don't think they use flux at all. It's really pretty nasty looking. So, you know, what is the real standard of quality for refurbishing these phones? I don't know the answer to that, but I would guess that it varies depending on the luck of the draw for the most part. Timing without cosmetic blemish as something to be valued for instead of disposed to the curb. Looks like a CD tray mechanism with a worm screw and everything. Yeah, it does. It does look very similar to that. So this will be cool to see though. And let's see. Okay, so we're 220. Let's jump over here and talk about Samsung, who is going to possibly be releasing 3 different Galaxy S10 phones. And I want to say they just released another one called the J3, or they're about to, which is supposed to be kind of a budget model for a very low price. I want to say it was coming around the 160 or something like that, if I remember correctly. But more importantly, the 3 Galaxy S10 devices are reportedly nicknamed Beyond 0, Beyond 1, and Beyond 2. I'm not sure what or why they came up with that one. ET News says that Beyond 0 will have a 5.8-inch display and 1 rear camera. Beyond 1 will have a 5.8-inch display and 2 rear cameras, while Beyond 2 will be 6.2 inches and have 3 rear cameras. Although the report doesn't share prices, it says that the S10 lineup will cater to both entry-level buyers and people looking for top-of-the-line specs, which is probably a good strategy in some ways. And at the same time, you know, this seems to be the direction that Apple is going. And if Samsung is doing the same thing, then this is just one more situation where we have the 2 dominant manufacturers just basically, you know, following the same game plan. And that is, we have choice A, choice B, choice C. You know, choice C being the flagship, choice A probably being the least expensive phone you can possibly get. But we would assume all of them having a very similar form factor, with the exception that there will be a larger one. And actually, let me correct myself, because the first 2 versions that are 5.8 inch, I would assume that the Beyond 0 is the entry level. The Beyond 1 is most likely the flagship, and then the Beyond 2 would be the Plus model, if you want to think of it that way. So really, not a whole lot of variety in there. Now, I would also assume that Samsung would continue to make its entire line of phones, so we shouldn't have to worry about, you know, am I going to buy this flagship or this flagship? There should be plenty of alternatives to that. Again, I just read today that they're releasing the J3 in a version that's going to be super low cost. So as far as other features, they don't really give us a lot of details as far as what to expect. You know, it's entirely possible that they will do away with the headphone jack sooner or later, and that's another one of the rumors that are floating around. There was also something about the rear camera display, or sorry, about the rear camera configuration, and I believe that is, you know, the main advantage being that if you go to the Beyond 2, which would be the plus size version of the phone, that you'll get that triple camera setup, which, you know, maybe this is really helpful, and maybe that is what the public really wants, is 3 cameras on the back of their phones. I don't know. I haven't heard a lot of people complaining about cameras on smartphones. And from what I've seen, certainly, you know, we've come a long ways to the point where a lot of phones that you can get, about to sneeze here, a lot of phones that we use nowadays are just leaps and bounds beyond what we had in cameras just a year or 2 ago. So I don't know. I guess eventually it's going to be like 3D virtual reality photographs or something. I'm not sure how much further we can go with cameras, but if there's anything about smartphones at this point that is hard to deny as being an impressive feature, I think it's the camera quality. We have some pretty insane camera capabilities on smartphones that we, you know, just carry around in our pockets all day. So that's pretty cool. So it says the 3-tier phone release is pretty similar to the Huawei P20 series. Earlier, Huawei released the P20, blah, 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 which helps 3 cameras, which helps with low light pictures, zooming, and portrait mode effects. And I'm not sure how that works. They talk a lot about how having more than one camera helps with the portrait effect, but they're not talking about the part where it blurs out the background. So I'm not sure how that works exactly. In fact, they were actually discussing a phone that has a single camera and then how portrait works in relation to that. And I'm not sure. I don't know. How many people are taking portraits? That is the question. Hello, I have a question. I bought iPhone on eBay, which has replaced non-OEM Chinese pixelated screen. What? Okay, I have a question. I bought a phone on eBay which has a replaced non-OEM Chinese pixelated screen. IKNKE. I'm not sure what that stands for, George, but if you bought anything on eBay and you have problems with it, I want to say within a long time. I think it's like 90 days or 180 days now. You can go back and contact the buyer, obviously, you know, or the seller. Go through the proper channels, let them know you have a problem, and they should offer you some sort of solution. One reason that I'm really a huge fan of eBay, and I will say it does take some time to look around, check people's feedback, and will vary from one product to another. But if you're familiar with eBay it's easy enough to find a reliable seller, and those sellers are very concerned about their reputation. They're very concerned about their feedback. So if you have any problems, contact them. They should offer you a solution. And if not, you can always escalate it to eBay. And if eBay can't do anything about it, more than likely you paid through PayPal, so you can contact PayPal and they'll offer you some sort of arbitration. And then of course, if PayPal isn't cooperating, if you use a credit card, then you've got that as another layer of protection. So again, it's easy to understand why sellers on eBay want to keep their customers happy, and that's one of the reasons I'm a big fan of that. I don't always find that that is the case with other platforms where you can buy online through a third party that goes through some big website. You know, I haven't had the best experience everywhere else, but with eBay so far, I'm pretty satisfied. I'm assuming that they should offer you a screen. I don't know, that's a good question, but certainly contact the person that sold you the phone. S10H, S10M, S10S, S10 Beyonce, maybe. Maybe so. All right, so next up we have Motorola. This is pretty cool, and I'm really happy to see Motorola or anyone else doing anything that might be noteworthy, because we just have these two behemoths of phones out there right now. We have Samsung and we have Apple, and then we have all the other guys that are, you know, just not creating the kind of excitement that we would have hoped for, at least not within the US market. And there are a lot of reasons that's happening. You know, one is obviously the representation within the carrier stores. So if AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile don't want to give a deal to company X, that company is going to have a hard time selling their product here in the US. And on top of that, we have officials who are, you know, kind of discouraging anyone from doing business with Chinese phone companies. So that really cuts down the variety that we have available to us here in the US. So obviously if you're in China, that's going to be a different story. Same with Europe. But over here, it's like you got Samsung, you've got Apple, and you might be able to get a look at an LG or, gosh, you know, hopefully Motorola at this point. But until one of those companies or one of the other companies does something really big, I think that that trend is going to continue, which is unfortunate, again, for the consumers. But here on Digital Trends, they are talking about Motorola, who might be jumping into the foldable smartphone, or onto the foldable smartphone bandwagon, which really, we haven't seen anything that could truly be called a foldable phone yet, right? I mean, we've seen phones that will open up like a clamshell and fold together, but they tend to have two separate displays and some sort of hinge in between them. So you end up with a big border that goes around both of those images. So, you know, without that seamless image from one side to the next, I don't think that calling it foldable, I guess you could call it a foldable phone, but foldable screen would not be an accurate term, because the screen itself is not really being folded. You're just taking two different screens and setting them side by side. However, according to this new patent that I want to say was awarded, let's go down here and make sure I'm reading this accurately. The company has been awarded a patent for a flexible smartphone display. Now, why is there a separate patent going to Motorola, or how is Motorola getting this patent when we have other companies that are already working on this technology? Well, here is the deal. Supposedly, according to an article, allegedly, the patent says, first of all, OLED displays can be very flexible, but frequent bending can cause permanent deformations in the crease. And this is always my question, you know, how do you take a screen and fold it completely in half and not have some sort of problem with that area where it's being bent repeatedly over time? And the patent says that Motorola supposedly will use heat to fight off the damage to the OLED display caused by folding and unfolding. The company plans to place a heating element in the hinges of its smartphone that will increase the temperature of the display to counteract creasing and other damage caused by repetitive use. Now, we have used heat traditionally to remove screens from phones without damage, you know, especially when we're working with OLEDs that have a bunch of adhesive behind them, sticking them down to some sort of mid-frame. But in my experience, we've always used the heat because of the problem with the adhesive holding the screen down. And if you put any pressure on the screen, they tend to snap really easy. I had never considered that heat might actually aid in allowing the OLED screen to bend a little more without breaking or without causing some problems. But, You know, if we're talking about a phone that actually folds in half, we've gone quite a ways beyond what we are currently looking at, because any OLED screen that you work with right now has very little tolerance for bending. You know, you get, I don't know if you could describe it in degrees really. They do have a certain amount of flexibility, but if you go too far, they snap easy. And I believe that's because of the substrate that is underneath the OLED itself. Now, with this technology, it sounds like they're changing to something else that is completely flexible. And, you know, obviously the problem that they're having is blemishes being created by that repeated bending. But if heat is the answer, if you can heat up an OLED screen and that will prevent that from happening, that is going to bring a whole new angle on the engineering of a phone. If you have a heating element built into the screen, it really sounds counterintuitive, especially when we think about heat as being a problem for many different reasons inside of a phone. You know, the most obvious one being the battery. If the battery gets too warm, we end up having trouble there. Anything from rapid discharge to the phone actually exploding or catching on fire. When we think about the components that are inside the phone, you know, excessive heat over a period of time can cause them to wear out a lot sooner than they're designed to. So I don't know how they're going to go about doing this thing. There are some images here if you want to take a look. But again, I'm a little skeptical about this. I mean, it'll be interesting to see, but it says heating process to repair semi-transparent deformation result after heating process. So apparently when you fold these things, you get a deformation in the screen, but somehow the heat is going to help to fix that. Wow, I will have to wait to see this, but I guess it's cool to hear that Motorola is getting into this. I was disappointed. I was looking at Motorola as an option, and unfortunately they don't seem like they're doing much with wireless charging anymore. And that, you know, as I've said before, I'm a huge proponent of, maybe a little ahead of its time, but certainly does the job for me. I set my phone down as charging, I pick it up, it's not. No worryings about plugging things in or ever wearing out a charging port or anything like that. And of course, if you had your headphones plugged in, you can also charge your phone at the same time on the wireless charger. You don't have to choose one or the other or buy a special dongle for it. So to me, that seems like a cool thing. I wish they would bring back the flip phone with the real keyboard, basically like the GPD Win computer, but a phone. You know, I like, they did have a clamshell with a touchscreen, didn't they? I want to say that Samsung did that a while ago. I may be wrong. Clamshell Galaxy S2 with a physical keyboard. Does anyone remember that one? Galaxy S2? I don't remember that one. I do remember a Galaxy phone that had Windows that I believe had a physical keyboard and a display, if I remember correctly. Maybe it didn't. It's been a while. Only if it's made using flubber. There you go. The OLED substrate is rather brittle instead of elastic. Yeah, that's what I was kind of thinking. So they've obviously switched, at least on that section between the two screens. We'll be expecting something. Let's see, can I move that? Oh, that's kind of cool. I can pick it up and move it, but I can't really highlight it. We'll expect something else to be underneath that area so that it is capable of bending, I would assume. IPS displays are flame resistant. OLED get burned and blackened as per Zach from Jerry Riggs' channel. Yeah, I suppose if you hold a flame over your phone, you know, underneath your screen, that might cause some problems. But yeah, hey, you never know when you might be using your phone and it falls in the campfire and you have to retrieve it and hope that your pixels come back to working, I guess. I don't know. I would really like to see, you know, those jet fuel lighters. It's not a flame. It's actually, it shoots out a flame, like in blue. I'd like to see one of those tested on a phone and see how long they last. Let's see, what else we got? Motorola is by no means the first smartphone manufacturer rumored to be working on a foldable display. We knew that, right? In 2015, rumors surfaced that Samsung was working on a device dubbed Project Valley. That was in 2015, so apparently we haven't seen that yet. Several major smartphone manufacturers are purportedly working on smartphones with foldable displays. Samsung's Galaxy X or Galaxy 10, is it the Galaxy X or the Galaxy 10? I'm not sure. Has been the most talked about device thus far and may be announced in 2019. The phone will likely serve as Samsung's flagship and may sell for $1,800. So I'm already over that. You know, really $2,000 for a phone. I think $1,000 is enough for some people. I can't even convince myself that I use my phone enough to invest $1,000 into it, especially when the expected lifespan is a year to a year and a half. But maybe there's a market for that. Apple also reportedly working on a foldable iPhone scheduled for 2020. Okay. rumored to fold out into an iPad. All right. Let's see. However, it looks like Huawei may be, and this is, again, digital trends. Huawei may beat both Apple and Samsung to the punch, reportedly working on a foldable flagship to be announced later this year. Okay. Interesting. Yeah, and then they referenced the Axon M, which I think was really a big disappointment if you were expecting a display that actually folds in half, because it doesn't. It's not what it does. Any good recommendation for under $400 unlocked smartphone and multi-band capable? I'm going to leave that one there, Johnny. It really depends on what you want. I'm assuming you are not looking for an iPhone, because if you are, then you know what your options are going to be. Under $400, you're looking for a brand new phone? That is a good question. Off the top of my head, no. I'm sure there's something out there, though. Apple refutes passcode bypass claims by hacker. Claims it's a result of incorrect testing. So I don't know if you heard about this, but last week there was a news article, several news articles coming out that said that there was someone who had, for the most part, figured out a way to connect an iPhone to a computer. And the problem, first of all, I should qualify this. We're talking about a 4-digit passcode. So if you remember back on the iPhone 4, they figured out a way, there was an exploit in the firmware that allowed you to recover. You could bypass the disabled screen. You could recover a 4-digit numeric passcode, and that was it. And by the time that this hack was publicly available, Apple was no longer supporting the iPhone 4. It also worked on the iPod Touch 4th generation. And since there were no more upgrades, it's pretty much a permanent hack. There's been nothing done by Apple because the devices were so old. So you can still use that exploit to recover a password. Well, the thing about it was that at the time they were using a brute force, which just means basically that the program would execute a command that would punch in 4 zeros, then it would punch in 3 zeros followed by a 1, 3 zeros followed by a 2, and it would all go all the way up to 9999 or 0000, whichever you want to start with, and it would exhaust all of those possibilities until it found the correct passcode. So they define that as a brute force password hack. So you just keep trying every possible combination until you find the right one. Well, Apple obviously was concerned by this. You don't want people to be able to hack into your devices. That's not going to help you sell these phones. And they figured out a patch to prevent that from happening on later models. And the way it's been explained is that they have also introduced software that will prevent you from just trying one password after another. And you've seen this before. If you've entered in the wrong passcode too many times, you have to wait a minute, then you have to wait 5 minutes, and you have to wait an hour, then you have to wait a day. And then I think ultimately you have to wait like a year before you can try the next attempt. And this prior exploit would allow you to get around that. You wouldn't have to wait in between password attempts. And my understanding is that this was patched to fix that problem. However, there was a hacker who claimed that instead of trying a brute force password attack by doing different codes one after the other, he figured out a way to send every possible code to the phone simultaneously. So the phone, instead of saying, hey, I've already exceeded the number of attempts that you can try, it would test every single code that he input at once, and then allow the correct one to get through. That's the way that I understood this. However, a couple days later, Apple is saying that no, that's not exactly correct, and in fact, it cannot be hacked this way. And I'm going to read the, I'll give credit here again where it's due. Matthew Hickey, who goes by Hacker Fantastic, took to Twitter on Saturday to show how the iPhone's passcode could be bypassed with a simple hack. He shows that in settings that the erase data option has been switched on. He then runs his software which sends a passcode attempt ranging from 4 zeros to 4 nines to the iPhone at once instead of one at a time. The 1-minute video shows that the iPhone gets unlocked within seconds of running the software. Now, that's what we thought initially. However, according to Apple and some updated information, the hacker, well, let's jump down to here to his response, because Apple said, no, that is not correct. You can't do this. After a day of posting about the brute force attack, the hacker suggested in a correction on his original claim that the iPhone's Secure Enclave processor, or SEP, appeared to register less pins than previously thought due to instances of pocket dialing and overly fast inputs, When I sent the codes to the phones, it appears that 20 or more are entered, but in reality, it's only ever sending 4 or 5 pins to be checked, which doesn't make sense because I would think still if you're sending 4 or 5 at a time, after you do that 10 times, it seems like you would run out of tries, right? Hickey said that he reported his findings to Apple before tweeting about them. In a statement to ZDNet, Apple spokesperson Michael Wyman responded to the Hickey's claim. That's funny. To the Hickey's claim. That's the way they wrote the article. The recent report about a passcode bypass on iPhone was in error and a result of incorrect testing. The company did not provide any details about precisely why it disputes the findings. And of course, we know that Apple is supposed to be releasing an update, I believe, on iOS 12 that will prevent you from attempting any passcode input after your phone has not been unlocked for a certain period of time. And I think the default on that, if I remember correctly, was like 24 hours, or it might have been 48. So if you haven't unlocked your phone, let's say within 24 hours, you can no longer use the fingerprint scanner or use the passcode. Now I want to go back and look that article up because I can't remember exactly. But the most important part of it was that it would disable the Lightning port from being used for anything other than charging the phone. So something like this where you have to connect a computer to the phone in order to input these codes would not work if enough time has elapsed since the last time the code was manually input or the phone was unlocked by the user. That's the way I understand it. So hopefully if you're worried about your iPhone getting hacked, you can relax. That's probably less likely than it ever has been, although we still do have the concern with gray shift, and this was said to be one of the reasons why Apple is updating to prevent anyone from being able to hack into a phone after a certain period of time, because there is a company who claims and apparently has been selling this device to multiple organizations, law enforcement, government agencies, and so forth, in order to aid with investigations. So we still have this thing going back and forth where we want to catch the bad guys, and at the same time we have a company who wants to be able to say we protect our customers' privacy. And these two things being at odds obviously presents a real paradox here. We want to make sure that if we're conducting a criminal investigation that we can get as much evidence as we can, and at the same time, once that capability is achieved, it's very difficult to keep that technology out of the wrong hands, because sooner or later someone who has access to it says, you know what, I can profit from this on the side or on the black market or under the table or some other method, and they come out with a way to sell that to basically anyone who's willing to pay for the information. So yeah, what do we do? What do we do with that? Any good oh, sorry, let's see. Actually I was gonna say the Moto G6, I looked at that one myself, and unfortunately, I want to say that's one of the ones that doesn't have wireless charging, and that's kind of what killed the deal, but pretty decent phones. They are priced similarly, but the newer one has half the processor power and come with Oreo out of the box. And I don't have any hands-on experience with that, Johnny, so I can't tell you, but I would certainly consider Motorola. One thing about them is they've been somewhat durable as far as phone goes and pretty stable, and I do like that their charging capability is pretty fast. It's really a bummer that they don't have the wireless, but I guess you just plug it in for a shorter period of time. Schrodinger cat attack, all the possibilities are valid as long as you don't peek inside the black box. Yeah, something like that. That's another fun one to discuss, right? All right, so AT&T is allegedly buying a company that delivers targeted ads based on your web browsing. I don't know, do we just give up and assume that eventually wherever you go, there's going to be nothing but advertising aimed at you that knows everything about you, so they know what to try to sell you, I guess? I mean, I'm not saying it's right. I'm just starting to wonder whether or not it's avoidable. I think eventually we'll drive by with our virtual reality goggles, and each one of us will see a different image on the billboard that we're looking at that is designed to target our buying habits based on, where we go on the web, where we travel to, who we associate with, what we post on social media, probably what kind of videos we upload to YouTube. I will say that I've been seeing some bizarre stuff in my feed on YouTube, and on that note, YouTube has recently announced a new feature, a sponsor button that goes down below the video that you can use to sponsor your favorite YouTube creator. as long as they have 100,000 subscribers. So yeah, only 48,000 and something to go. And I don't know why, you know, it's one thing to create a limit of 1,000 subscribers before people can monetize their content, but to make 100,000 the threshold, and you know, rather than the number of views or the amount of viewing time or any other metric that goes into determining whether or not someone's channel is worthy of utilizing a new feature that allows them to monetize their content, I think the number of subscribers, especially a number like 100,000, is a bit steep. That's just my opinion, and maybe I'm biased, but you know, really, I think it's unfortunate that people have to wait till 1,000 subscribers before they can monetize, because really, if the views are there and if the view time is there, then from an advertiser's perspective, it makes sense to allow commercials or ads or whatever to be on that person's YouTube videos. But what do I know? So acquisitions, as we know, AT&T was allowed by everyone pretty much to acquire Time Warner. And it doesn't stop there. AT&T announced a definitive agreement with App Nexus, saying that AT&T is investing to accelerate the growth of its advertising platform and strengthen its leadership in advanced TV advertising. And, you know, for the most part, AT&T is going to do everything that they possibly can to compete with Comcast and, Comcast. They're going to do everything they can to compete with YouTube or with Google and with Facebook advertising. There, I finally got it out. Third try is the charm. And in addition to that, I assume that they would want to compete with Comcast. I wish that they would want to compete with Comcast. I don't agree with a lot of what these companies are doing, but it would certainly be nice to see some competition for my ISP. I mean, I have one to choose from. So if AT&T wants to step up their game and offer a faster connection speed, that might put some pressure on the monopoly that we have in my area and in many other areas. And same thing goes for AT&T. You know, a lot of people have AT&T as their broadband choice, and that's it. So take it or leave it. And that is unfortunate, and that is, of course, one of the big arguments behind why we need net neutrality. But I won't go off on that road today. More importantly, how is it so easy for a company like AT&T or anyone else just to say, yeah, you know, we're going to start keeping track of everything that you do on your phone and on your computer so that we can decide what sort of advertising we want to push to you? And is that something to be concerned about? I don't know. Maybe if you don't think that it's anyone else's business, and maybe if you don't want to be bombarded with advertising, you know, because you clicked on a link that goes to something that you're not interested in, and now you start seeing all sorts of advertising, or you know, you follow some clickbait ad and you end up on some page that you're not interested at all, and suddenly you see a bunch of this stuff in your Facebook feed. It's really weird. I don't think it's good. There should definitely be an opt-out button, and they do talk a little bit about that down here. AT&T could, according to this article, also charge broadband customers extra in exchange for turning off web browsing data collection. Isn't that nice of them? If you don't want them to collect your data for when you're browsing on the web, all you have to do is pay an extra $29 a month. That's very generous of you guys. AT&T formerly ran a program called Internet Preferences, which analyzed its customers' internet habits and used the results to deliver personalized ads to the websites they visited. AT&T deployed Internet Preferences on its fiber internet service and charged at least another $29 a month for internet service that didn't perform the extra scanning of customers' web traffic. And this is what gets me about things like cable TV and Pandora and I want to say Spotify. Just recently, you know, I started noticing that if I want to listen to music on Spotify, I have to listen to 4 or 5 commercials beforehand. And this is with a paid membership to a service that provides streaming music. So my thinking is this: can we either have commercials or pay a subscription fee? I think when we start doing both, that's when we've gone a little too far here. Okay, if I'm paying for cable to be delivered into my house, that's because I want to watch channels that don't have advertising built into the programs. If I wanted that, I would stick an antenna up on top of my house and get digital TV and watch commercials that way. I just, it's almost like taxes. You get double, triple, and probably quadruple taxed, and they do something very similar when it comes to cable programming and, now streaming music and everything else. Yeah, I'm not sure what to do with that, AT&T. The other thing that gets me about this is every time I contact an ISP and talk about anything, whether it's an inquiry, a question, a network problem, some sort of tech support, they are always trying to sell me into a package that has television, internet, and telephone. Who wants a telephone in their house anymore? Wouldn't it be wiser to invest in some sort of infrastructure other than telephones? Because home and even business phones by now are at the very least voice over IP. In many cases, we don't even have a phone. I have a phone right here. I don't need a phone coming out of the wall in my house. I think that they've really not kept up with the demands that people have for service. Hey, John Cassidy, how's it going? Third party meddling into customers' browsing habit. Yeah, and I can think of 101 problems with that, and one of them is going to be that eventually you're going to start seeing more advertising that is misleading, that gets you to click on things that you're not really interested in, and just aggregating information about anything without someone's consent seems like a problem. If someone was to walk up to your vehicle and place a GPS device on it and you didn't have any say in the matter and they just got to keep track of where you went all the time, you'd probably not be okay with that, right? I mean, we make a sacrifice with our devices where we turn on location services if we need navigation, or if we have something else that, say you have a weather application, you want to know how the weather is outside your location, you turn on your location services in order to figure out that. I get it, I understand. But you also have an option to turn that off, and I think you should have the same option when it comes to your browser and your ISP, or your internet connection. If you want to go and do research on the effects of smoking cigarettes, by virtue of doing something like that, you are in one way or another communicating to someone, to that ISP, that you are interested in cigarettes. And this can become a problem. And this is one of the examples that's given. I do not smoke cigarettes, but if I want to read about the negative health effects of smoking, suddenly I'm going to see advertisements coming into my feed that are related to that information. And unfortunately, it is entirely legal and possible that someone who has access to a health insurance database finds out that I have been looking at the negative health effects of smoking, and if they factor that into my life insurance policy with the assumption that I use these products that have a negative health effect, well, obviously that can be a problem for me. That can affect everything from my rate to, maybe them declining to take me on as a customer. So you see how we don't really think about all of the possibilities behind sharing this information, and there's a real problem, I think, with that. But I'm just one guy, and those are just my thoughts. So I don't suppose that's going to change anytime soon. However, here's a real freaky one for you. And let me back up. Before I jump ahead, let me go down here. Now cable is more about signal quality than content quality. I agree. And the cable companies, unfortunately, seem very stubborn to me, and I understand this, and we see the same thing with oil companies. If you have a product that you've been selling for a long time and it's been profitable for you, when something else is presented as an alternative, whether it's cord cutting, streaming services online, solar power, anything else like that, that would be a good option for your customers, your concern, I think, should be transitioning over to that new technology rather than trying to fight it. But if you're a huge corporation and you have tons of money and your business model says we are making money now, we need to prevent any competition from entering the marketplace, then that is often what you end up doing. And it's really sad, because ultimately we should be doing the best thing for the customer, right? Not the best thing to make, buy someone else an extra yacht this year, so they have to make a little more money to do so. But that's capitalism, I suppose, on one level, from a certain perspective. I'm not opposed to it. I just think there are a few things wrong here and there with what we're doing. Smart home devices are being used in domestic abuse. That's pretty freaky, right? So This had never even entered my mind before, but they are talking about, this is from the New York Times, but is published on Digital Trends, a disturbing new trend that leverages smart devices as tools of abuse, with some ill-intentioned users using their smartphones in order to remotely control locks, speakers, thermostats, lights, and the like, and wreak emotional havoc on those within the home. This is something, you know what's really weird is I hadn't thought about that, and I think Johnny or one of you guys is going to remember this. We were talking about an X-Files episode where it was kind of like a Maximum Overdrive version where the devices kind of turned on the people inside of the show. And I actually saw one on, I don't know if you've heard of this, but there's a sort of sci-fi comedy that I want to say is on Hulu. It's called Future Man. And they had a very similar episode to this where they were locked inside of, whose home was it? I want to say it was the Michael Bay. I think they were locked inside of Michael Bay's home. And the home assistant was actually using the devices that were installed inside of the home to control the people who were inside and, you know, attempt to do them harm and so forth. But this is a real deal. This is people taking control of a smart home and using that to harass someone who's inside the house. So if you can imagine, you know, worst case scenario, you've got a home that's outfitted with automatic locks, automatic music, automatic lights, and you can take control of that remotely and do things with it that are not pleasant for the person who's inside the home. That brings domestic abuse to a whole different technological level and pretty freaky. So the Times conducted interviews with more than 30 people, lawyers, shelter workers, abuse victims, and emergency responders who noted that Internet of Things devices were leveraged for purposes beyond the manufacturer's intentions. For example, abusers would reportedly control objects in their or their victim's home, watching and listening to conversations and comings and goings, or in some cases, using them to scare of show power. What? Okay, am I saying this right? This is what it says. Using them to, quote, scare of show power. Scare of show power? Maybe that's supposed to be scare off show off scare power? I don't know. That's some weird wording on that one. In some cases, the abusers would cause loud bursts of music to suddenly play, change the lighting, turn on or off heating or cooling units, or otherwise make a home seemingly act of its own accord. Could you imagine this? So again, this is like an episode on TV that I watched where it was the home assistant that was doing it. But ultimately, if someone wanted to be a real jerk and they could lock a home, you know, lock all the doors remotely, and prevent someone from unlocking them while they're inside the home, you know, crank up the heat to some ridiculous temperature, play loud music, have the lights flashing on and off, or maybe just turn the lights off completely, that could really mess with your head. I mean, if you're stuck inside the home, you probably want to break a window to get out. Much of the challenge in addressing this new cycle of abuse is that there is still a lack of knowledge, generally speaking, when it comes to how to operate in many of these Internet of Things devices. People have started to raise their hands in training and ask what to do about this. Erica Olson, director of the Safety Net Project at the National Network to End Domestic Violence, told the Times, this is really messed up and freaky and something I had never thought about before. She noted that she noted that she was reticent to discuss the abuse of smart technology because we don't want to introduce the idea to the world. But now that it's become so prevalent, the cat's out of the bag. And this is one of those other things where you often hear people say, you know, you'll be reading in a forum and they'll say, well, you know, if terrorists wanted to do something harmful, they could do X. And then, you know, later on, all the comments are, why did you say that? Now they're going to use your idea to do whatever. And I think that's a bit naive to assume that because you don't talk about something, people haven't figured it out and use it for the wrong purposes. And I know that when we have, you know, when there's a certain type of crime going on, they try to withhold a lot of details on that crime so that we don't see copycat stuff going on. And I understand that, and it makes sense. But, you know, to make anything off limits for discussion, especially when it's become a problem, doesn't seem like a good choice. And maybe I'm missing something here, but I don't think you could assume that just because you don't tell someone how to commit a crime that they haven't already thought about it or that they won't figure it out ultimately. And it's probably one of those cases where it's better if nobody knew about it, but once they do, I believe it's more valuable that we understand how to protect ourselves from that type of crime than worrying about, oh, if we talk about it, then suddenly it's going to become widespread. I don't think that's logical, but that's just my thinking. Now cable is more quality, which is that remember me of a Johnny 5 hack. What Johnny 5 hack? I don't know of that one. All right, so I made it right on the nose. That is exactly where 3 o'clock happens, and I'm going to end the stream today and not keep you overtime. I've got a lot of stuff on the table that I'm going to get to, including a non-functional home button on an iPhone 7 and a touchscreen problem on an iPad Pro 12.9, which hopefully I'll be able to show you the solutions for later on. Also testing out the G-Lon home button repair tool for the iPhone 7. And I've got Easy Draw working, so for those of you who wanted to see a review of a different board level software, I finally got that thing up and running, so I'm going to do a comparison between that and ZXW, hopefully before my membership expires, because I've got to re-up that thing. Right, from Short Circuit, gotcha. So I'll have that hopefully later on this week, and then of course we'll be back on... We will be back. You know, I forgot to put the chat up here again. What is with me? Okay, so let's do... Man, I've got buttons just pressing themselves all over the place. Sorry about that, folks. I completely forgot to put the chat on here. So I won't edit this video for a while so you can see what was going on in there. But ultimately, I like to cut off the part at the beginning because it's just 3 minutes of nothing waiting for the stream. So I'll be back on Thursday, this Thursday, 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And then, of course, again, next Monday at 2 p.m. and hopefully some other DIY and repair videos between now and then. So I will talk to you next time.